Welcome once again to one of our little virtual tours, Mont Saint-Michel on this occasion. If you feel inclined to donate or contribute towards the production costs of this, please feel free to do so. You'll see links underneath the video here on YouTube, both in the description and in the comments box. Otherwise, enjoy. I look forward to doing more of these in the future. The Abbey, as you can see by the diagram, is surrounded by fortifications, very clearly marked, but it sits atop a granite outcropping in the middle of the tidal estuary. There are a number of these. Originally this island was called Mont. There's a little one off to the northeast of it called Tombelaine, and there's the Dol de Bretagne to the south. These are all granite outcroppings, very clear to the eye, very visible on the landscape. Here's an aerial view of Mont Saint-Michel. You can see the tidal estuary around it. The tide comes in at a rate of knots, approximately 200 feet per minute. You don't want to get caught in those sands when it does this, and the sound is incredible. The river estuary that it's fed by is called the River Couesnon. So, originally founded as a religious settlement in the Dark Ages, as we call it, the 5th, 6th, 700s, possibly by Irish monks, became organised in the 800s, 900s and has developed as an abbey monastery to this day, housing a small number of monks and nuns even now. The population on the island very small, perhaps about 25 people. That includes the monks, that includes the nuns, 7 or 8 local people running the shops, living in the small village within the walls themselves at the moment. Otherwise, 3.5 million visitors a year come to visit Mont Saint-Michel, and I think you can see why. Quite a magnificent structure. Here we are, we're walking towards it now, walking towards the Causeway, walking up towards the gates of the island. So, welcome to Mont Saint-Michel. It's a beautiful day. There's a trickle of people making their way to the island. And Tony and I are 2 of them. So Tony, have you ever seen the Causeway this quiet in your years of tour guiding here?
Not in the middle of the day, most definitely not.
Splendid, isn't it? What a great opportunity.
Fantastic.
Here we are walking along the new Causeway with just a smattering of pilgrims and travellers today. It's a quiet day. We're in the middle of confinement and in the middle of the COVID-19 bug. But there are a few people around enjoying the weather and enjoying the scenery and the view. And here's a chance to look out over the bay as well. It's a truly spectacular day today, the hottest day of the year. It's 32 degrees centigrade or Celsius here. Looking up at the Mount, crystal clear sky. There are seagulls everywhere. You're going to be hearing those in some of the clips a little bit later on because they are everywhere. Protect your sandwiches. There are the sea walls, the defensive walls, built in the 1400s during the 100 Years' War. English and French kings at war with each other over territory in Europe, and this particular fortress defended itself quite well against the English troops. So we're actually based on the small island just to the north of Mont Saint-Michel itself, laying siege to it for some period of time. One direct assault failed, and they laid siege to the fortress of Mont Saint-Michel for a period of time before essentially giving up. And now we're heading towards the main gateway. You can see it just about over there to the left-hand side of the white van. That's the main entrance nowadays into the Mont. Beyond that, there's a visitor centre and public bathrooms. Now you can see that smattering of people have been funneled into this main road or route that goes up through the village of Mont Saint-Michel. Beautiful timber frame buildings on either side, gorgeous architecture still visible to the eye today. T-shirt shops, pancake shops, omelette shops, ice cream vendors, you name it, it's here. We've decided to come up out of the main street and get up onto the fortifications, the walls around the island, the ramparts as they're called. And look who we found, a little a stray seagull looking out to sea, no doubt, through that telescope. However, it's a little bit less crowded here and the views are spectacular, so we're going to be following the walls now up around the outside of the island, up towards the Abbey. A brief glimpse of the top of the Abbey, but then you can see some of the many hotels that cluster around this section of walls here, many of which are used on the Rick Steves tours today. We're just walking around some of the ramparts of the Mount. The ramparts, the walls around the island, essentially built during the 100 Years' War, 1400s. And you can see here how extensive they are. The bells are chiming for the noon mass. I'm just going to pan around. You can hear the seagulls. Those are the ramparts, or a portion of them. Looking out beyond the river Couesnon, panning around the bay of Mont Saint-Michel. And over here in the distance, there's a little island. Here's a lovely view down onto some of the homes, some of the hostelries, hotels on the island. You see the slate roofs. They're not all slate roofs here. There are a number of timbered roofs. Very, very pretty sight. Very, very pretty sight indeed, with the bay behind. Here we are, we're at Mont Saint-Michel. I'm looking up at the ramparts. I'm actually down where the water was just 10 minutes ago. It comes in and goes out so quickly. The ramparts completely encapsulates the mount itself, about 1 kilometre all the way around. And on top of the mount is the Abbey, and it's the Abbey that we're going to explore later on. But before all of this was here, the walls being built during the 100 Years' War in the 1400s, before all of this was built, there was something else. The Romans called this mount the Gates of Hercules, quite probably because on top of the mount there was an ancient dolmen, a tomb to you and I, the remains of a tomb. And if you can imagine two uprights and a lintel, that's probably what the Romans saw and called it the Gates of Hercules, quite understandably. In the 700s, this had become a tomb, and a sacred tomb at that, only this time for the Christian church. And the monks who were settling here and dying here, burying their dead here, carried on building. There were probably small sects all over the island until it became a little more organised, and that came later, but we'll talk about that in a little while. So essentially history upon history upon history, the ancient, the Roman, and then the medieval, all in one spot, all here on Mont Saint-Michel. Now you can see the tide is gone from the bay. This morning at 11 o'clock it was in. Here we are at 3 o'clock, it's completely gone. The tide actually comes in at a rate of about 200 feet per minute. It covers these sands and quicksands very easily, very quickly. You can see there are people out there now. Tour guides, there's Nigel, Scotland, there's Tony, France, there's Debs, she's not really a tour guide, but she's Okay, we're panting a little bit. We're just taking a hike up the steps up towards the Abbey. Here's the Abbey entrance, and we're going to go inside. So as we enter into the Abbey itself, I'm looking up and around. You can see several arches. There would have been gates here at different points in time. But essentially on the right-hand side here, as we walk up through and go through this arch, you have one of two cisterns. Would have trapped rainfall, and that water would have been used throughout the Abbey's facilities. And there at the end of the steps there and above, you can see a walkway going across the steps. That would have enabled monks who were quartered on the left-hand side to go into the church. So we're climbing, as you can see, more steps, heading up towards that building at the end. That's another visitor's entranceway out onto the roofing deck of the Abbey itself, right up onto the top. The strange structure on the right there, very ornate, but it's actually the second of the two cisterns that I mentioned a moment ago. We're going to head on up and through the visitor's entrance at the top. We're going to go out onto the platform with the beautiful views around. Going to give you a chance to have a look at those, and then we'll go on into the Abbey itself, and that's the building there on the right hand side. Looking out to the south now as I pan the camera around, we're looking out over the estuary, the River Couesnon, looking down into what is Normandy, and out across towards Brittany, and you might be able to see some little white dots out there. Sheep, the famous sheep that graze on these salt grasses. The salt grasses are part of the polders, the polder land that you find a lot of in this area, courtesy of the estuary. So we're up on the west terrace now. I'm looking back towards the entrance to the Abbey Church, and you just saw the spires stretching up into the sky there, built in the late 1800s. The west terrace here now is used as a viewing platform. It was once enclosed, but now you can see it looks out to the west, of course, and again out over those polder lands, those grasslands, those farmlands, which are so valued now in this part of France. And here I am looking down from the west terrace walls down onto the ramparts beneath. You can see it's almost a vertical drop at this point. A little bit of the tide still left as it drains back out to sea. Imagine yourself as an English soldier trying to lay siege to this island. Daunting. So we're walking into the Abbey Church right now. You can see looking up, you can see the Romanesque arches, the timber-clad ceiling above that would have allowed people architecturally to build higher. Looking down the nave, you can see Gothic arches. This is because this church is actually a church of two stories. We have in the 11th century, the Romanesque building was created here on top of other structures beneath it. But then in the 1400s, there was a catastrophe. A portion of the church collapsed, and they had to rebuild this eastern end. And therefore, you have the Gothic stylized architecture. Look at the windows, beautiful Gothic arches there. So, to recap, beneath us, we have other layers of history, other layers of archaeology, other chapels, other churches, buildings that have surfaced, that have survived and have worked for the monks throughout history, from the 700s right up to the present day. In fact, as I said earlier on, there are still monks on the island now. There were never more than 60 monks in this on this island, servicing the monastery and the abbey and the churches. Never more than 60, which I find astonishing. If those of you who've been to Glastonbury with me, I talk about the 11 to the 1500 monks that lived and worked there in that abbey. There were never more than 60 here, and yet this is such an impressive, magnificent structure. We're looking around, look at the walls here, probably not plastered inside. Certainly down in some of the living accommodations that would have been the case, but not here, not in the church itself atop the mount. There's an old organ, dates to the 18th century. You can pan around, see again those Gothic arches at the east end of the church. Walking around, I noticed this nun in silent prayer. She's a member of the Brotherhood of Jerusalem. This is the sect that inhabit the church, the Abbey grounds today. It's a relatively modern order, founded in 1970s. You'll also find them at Vézelay and one or two other places dotted around France, but a relatively small sect. Okay, here we are. We're walking into the cloisters. Abbeys would have them. This is an area of silent contemplation for the monks. They'd come out of their dormitories, they'd come out of the church. They would praise themselves, they'd look to the heavens. Because these windows that you see around us today, these are a feature created for tourism in large part. They were not a part of the original abbey. These would have been walls. You would be forced to look up to the heavens themselves. The grassy area that you see now, in all probability, will have had medicinal herbs, plants growing that would have been of some benefit to the monks themselves. Nowadays, again, just a grassy area, low maintenance, of course. There's a beautiful view out through what is now a perspex window. Obviously, as I just said, not something that would have been there architecturally for the monks to take advantage of. I'm going to pan around, we're going to look back towards the church itself. You can see the church opens into the cloistered area, the dormitories will have opened into the cloistered area, and the monks could access other points of the abbey from here. So an interesting little feature of the cloisters is a little hole you're going to see in a moment. We think it's probably for drainage because being a gardened area, the cloister area would have contained an awful lot of water which would cause problems to the structures underneath. So essential to have good drainage. Walking from the cloisters into the refectory. This is where the monks will have sat silently and eaten. Probably central tables down the middle of this beautiful, beautiful hall. Recently restored and renovated. As you look the length of the room, it looks like those arches are walled arches, but then as I pan to the left, you can see there is glass there, allowing enormous amount of light to find its way into this beautiful room. I love this room. And look at the floor tiling, again, part of the recent renovation restoration, but very, very, very beautiful to look at today. In 708, Bishop Aubert of Avranches had a succession of dreams where the archangel St. Michael appeared before him, telling him to build high on the mount. He ignored the first couple of visitations, but eventually he did build high on the mount. The story goes that St. Michael actually pierced a hole in Bishop Aubert's skull to get this through to him. Maybe that's where we have the saying from today. I'm just thinking out loud now, but maybe we have that saying today, to get it through to you. Well, perhaps that's what St. Michael was doing to Bishop Aubert. Anyway, Mont Saint-Michel exists, and if you look at this plaque on the wall, you can see St. Michael piercing his skull with his thumb. So we come down to the Great Hall now. As I pan around to the left, you'll see two great fireplaces. This Great Hall was used by guests of the Abbey, people who had perhaps paid to become pilgrims and visit the Abbey, but certainly honoured guests as well. There would have been a partition, a screen across the middle of the Great Hall itself. This would have kept the guests away from perhaps the people who were working here in the kitchens. These fireplaces that you see, massive fireplaces. I'm going to look up the chimney of one right now. You can see the heavens above. massive fireplaces where they would have cooked the meat, the produce for the paying guests. The guests will have eaten sheep, those salt sheep from the marshes. The residents of the abbey, the monks, they will not have eaten the sheep. Any four-legged creatures, in fact, they would have refrained from eating. This room always interests me. We've come down another layer. We're now into quite a dark, dingy area. You could almost call it Catacombs Denis, but look at the size of these columns. Massive, massive structures. Of course, they're supporting something. They're actually supporting the church above, but it always strikes me, you come down from the hall, the Grace Hall, with those beautifully refined columns and the Gothic arches, and then you come down another flight of steps and you walk into this dingy little area with these massive, massive columns. Different architectural periods, different purposes, but gosh, how strikingly different. So we're still moving on through the abbey and the church and some of these structures contained within. We found ourselves in a little chapel, I believe the Chapel of St. Martin. It's one of the oldest features open to the public inside the abbey today. You can see the Romanesque arches, you can see the great thick walls, lime washed at some point in time in here, plastered at some point in time. Excuse the poor light, it is a fact of life here underground. In the 1780s all the way through to the 1860s, 1863 in fact, the middle of your American Civil War, the abbey was a prison, been turned into a prison. It was an island with no causeway, and it had been turned into a prison. You can imagine many thousands of people living here, interred here, working here, trying to get food for themselves here. Rations were pretty slim in the 1780s for sure, coming off the back of the French Revolution. Many political prisoners were here. This large wheel was used by some of the prisoners to bring up the goods from boats that would come into a dock beneath. They'd use the wheel as a flywheel and lift all of the heavy goods back up into the abbey so that they could be consumed by the inmates. Simple things such as tiling was stripped off the floor because it could be used as ammunition by the prisoners against the prison guards, which is why we have so many stone floors here now instead of the beautiful tiled floors that will have been here once before. But pretty grim conditions, a terrible place to live, a terrible place to have to work, and for many, the final resting place. Again, moving through some chambers, some hallways, some corridors. Within the oldest portion of the abbey itself, some of these rooms off to the right are occasionally open to the public, not at the moment. We're going to carry on walking through. Look at the vaulted ceilings, the stone vaults here. You can see experimentation with Gothic, but essentially the chamber we've just walked into here dates back to quite probably the 10th century, so 900s, when the organised church was beginning to develop properly here on the island. A combination of different architectural devices, different arches, all mixed up together here underground. But I've come down here for a specific reason, and I'm going to pan around. We're going to walk down towards this. This is actually the rock. This is the granite. This is the mount itself on which everything else is built. It's the heart of the abbey today. Spiraling down another layer down into the scriptorium, another great hallway in this abbey. This is where the monks will have worked. Essentially, they will have made their great manuscripts, and you all know what's entailed there. Beautiful hand-painted decorative books, manuscripts, legal documents as well. Great fireplace in here as well. This would have enabled the monks to stay warm. They will not have had warmth or heat in their own chambers, so this was a place that they would actually come to work and gain some warmth. Of course, the fireplace could also benefit the fact that their ink would not freeze in the particularly bad winters. But a hive of industry here, a hive of industry. So that concludes the interior tour. We're directed now by various footpaths around the Abbey back down to the exit. But look up, look at these granite walls. Think of the work taken to build and construct this dwelling, this working place over the centuries. A massive feat of engineering. And then look at the location. As we leave the interior of the Abbey, we directed via footpaths through these gardens, but the enormity of this structure always strikes me as I look up, as I look backwards and forwards along the exterior walls of the Abbey itself. This is a massive structure, an incredible architectural scheme. So there we go, we're working our way back down, taking a different route down, off the wrong route, off the main road. Little side alley, and you can see these beautiful streets crisscross the island. Tight little lanes and alleys like this all over the island. You can imagine them, can't you, in days gone by. Timber frame buildings hanging out over the streets, all of the garbage and waste coming out of the windows onto passers-by below. And of course everybody selling trinkets. This is a religious community. Money was made selling trinkets. Here we are in the small cemetery on Mont Michel, looking up towards the Abbey. The final resting place to members of the Poulard family. Big family on the island. They own half the restaurants and hotels for miles around. Finished our escapades today. I'm going to go back now and dub and edit and do the narration over all of the video I've taken. But I've had the help. See the two girls there? This is Tony, my wife, on the right. Tour guide for Rick Steve's France. Deb's her best friend on the left. She's married to this young chap here. You've seen him before in a previous video. That's Nigel. He's Rick Steve's tour guide to Scotland. And yours truly, Mark Seymour, Rick Steve's tour guide Britain. And today we decided to do something a little bit different, to bring to you the Mont. It's a very modern push-me-pull-you navettes that get people on and off the island, but they also have these, which I think are a whole lot better. I hope you've enjoyed the tour. It was fun making. We've got more in the pipeline, so feel free, if you're feeling generous and would like to donate towards the production cost of the next one. There's a link, a PayPal link beneath this video. You'll find it in the description, and you'll also find it in the comments. Thank you. Take care.